The Duke who ruined her name stood before the entire court and swore to protect her honor. Lady Olivia Ashford stood in the center of the Queen's ballroom with her gown torn at the shoulder, her hair disheveled, and the weight of 300 pairs of eyes pressing against her skin like hot coals. She could not breathe. She could not move. The Duke of Greystone, the man whose midnight garden embrace had just been discovered by half the peerage, stood 10 paces away, his jaw tight, his silver eyes unreadable. And then, in the suffocating silence that followed the gasps and whispers, he did the one thing no one expected. He dropped to one knee before her, his hand over his heart, and spoke loud enough for every soul in that glittering hall to hear. "I have wronged this woman, and I will spend the rest of my life making it right." Wait, before the next confession unfolds, if this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. The whispers exploded like a flock of startled birds. Olivia's vision blurred. Her knees threatened to buckle. She had been ruined, utterly, irreversibly ruined. Not 5 minutes ago, when Lady Pembroke and her entourage had stumbled upon them in the moonlit garden. She had gone there to escape the suffocating heat of the ballroom, to catch her breath after an evening of forced smiles and polite deflections. And he, Damien Blackwell, the Duke of Greystone, the man London's mothers warned their daughters about, had followed her. What had begun as a tense exchange of words had become something else, something dangerous, something she should have fled from the moment his fingers brushed the curve of her jaw. But she hadn't fled, and now she would pay for it with everything. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising tide of scandal, "please, don't." He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, his expression carved from stone. When he looked at her, there was something burning behind those cool gray eyes, something that made her chest tighten with a feeling she couldn't name. "It is already done," he said quietly, meant only for her. Then, louder, addressing the assembled lords and ladies, "Lady Olivia Ashford is under my protection. Anyone who speaks ill of her name answers to me." The Queen herself stepped forward, her jeweled fan snapping shut with a sound like a gunshot. "Greystone," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Do you understand what you are saying?" "I understand perfectly, Your Majesty." "Then you understand that protection of this nature requires formalization." Olivia's heart stopped. No, no, this couldn't be happening. The Duke's jaw flexed. For a moment, just a heartbeat, she saw something flicker across his face. Hesitation? Regret? But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Name your terms," he said. The Queen's eyes gleamed with a predator's satisfaction. "An engagement, announced tonight, married within the month." The room erupted. Olivia felt the floor tilt beneath her. This was worse than ruin. This was a cage lined with silk and gold, a lifetime sentence disguised as salvation. And the man who had just condemned her to it stood there, like a statue, his face revealing nothing. "No," she heard herself say. The word came out stronger than she felt. "Your Majesty, I cannot." "You can and you will," the Queen interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "Unless you prefer the alternative." The alternative. Social death. Her family's name dragged through the mud. Her younger sister Margaret's upcoming debut destroyed before it even began. Her father's failing health dealt a final fatal blow. Olivia's hands trembled. She clasped them together, willing herself not to break in front of all these vultures who would feed on her distress for months to come. "Well?" The Queen's voice was silk over steel. Damien moved then, closing the distance between them with 2 long strides. He took Olivia's cold hand in his touch warm and solid and utterly foreign. When she looked up at him, she saw his mouth curve into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Lady Olivia has accepted my proposal," he announced. "We will marry in 3 weeks' time at Greystone Abbey." Another explosion of sound. This time, scattered applause mixed with the whispers. Olivia wanted to scream, wanted to run. Instead, she did what every lady was trained to do from birth. She curtsied. She smiled. She played her part. And when the Duke raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a brand, she met his eyes and saw her own trapped reflection staring back at her. The carriage ride to her family's townhouse was conducted in absolute silence. Olivia sat on one side, the Duke on the other, the small space between them crackling with unspoken words. She kept her gaze fixed on the dark window, watching the gas lamps blur past, each one marking another moment of her old life slipping away. "You should have let them destroy me," she said, her voice hollow. "No. You don't even know me. I know enough." She turned to him then, anger flaring hot and bright in her chest. "You know nothing. You saw a woman alone in a garden and Her voice caught. She couldn't finish the sentence. His expression didn't change. "I saw a woman drowning in a room full of people, and recognized the look. I followed to make sure you were well. That is all." "That is all?" She laughed, the sound bitter. "That is all, and yet here we are, engaged, bound. You've ruined everything." "Everything was already ruined the moment Lady Pembroke saw us." "I merely chose a different ending. An ending where I become your prisoner." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You think I want this? You think I came to London seeking a bride? Then why?" The question burst from her like a wound breaking open. "Why protect someone you don't know? Why chain yourself to a stranger?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost gentle. "Because I know what it's like to be condemned by a society that feasts on scandal. Because I've watched good people be destroyed by wolves in silk. And because—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Because no one deserves to be abandoned in that moment." Olivia stared at him, trying to see past the perfect aristocratic mask he wore. For just a second, she thought she glimpsed something beneath it, something wounded and carefully hidden. The carriage stopped. They had arrived at her family's modest townhouse in the less fashionable part of Mayfair. Compared to the grandeur of the Duke's London residence, it must have looked like a cottage. "I'll call on your father tomorrow to make formal arrangements," Damien said as a footman opened the door. "The announcement will run in tomorrow's papers." Olivia gathered her skirts, preparing to flee into the safety of her home. But something made her pause at the threshold. She looked back at him, at this stranger who had just become her future. "I won't love you," she said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, a final defense against the loss of everything else. His smile was sad and knowing. "I don't expect you to." She stepped down from the carriage and didn't look back. Inside, her mother was waiting in the drawing room, still in her evening gown, her face pale with shock. Her father sat in his chair by the fire, looking older than his 58 years, his hands trembling slightly on the armrest, the tremor that had been growing worse these past months. "Olivia." Her mother's voice broke on the name. "Oh, my darling girl, what has happened?" And so Olivia told them about the garden, the discovery, the Duke's shocking declaration. Told them about the Queen's ultimatum and the engagement that would be announced to all of London by morning. Her father said nothing throughout her recitation. When she finished, he simply stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. It was her mother who spoke first. "The Duke of Greystone." She said the name like a prayer. "One of the wealthiest men in England. Olivia, do you understand what this means?" "It means I'm trapped. It means you're saved," her mother corrected, rising from her seat. She came to Olivia and took her hands, squeezing them with desperate intensity. "It means Margaret will still have her season. It means your father's creditors will stop circling. It means—" "Elizabeth." Her father's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Leave us." Her mother hesitated, then curtsied and withdrew, taking one last worried look at Olivia before closing the door behind her. Silence settled over the room like dust. "Come here, child," her father said finally. Olivia crossed to him and knelt beside his chair as she had done since childhood. He reached out with shaking hands and cupped her face, his eyes, still sharp despite his failing body, searching hers. "Tell me true," he said. "Did he force you? Did he harm you?" "No, Papa. He was kind in his way. But you don't want this." Tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked them back. "No." He nodded slowly. "I have failed you. I have failed to secure your future, to protect your happiness. And now you must pay the price for my failures." "Papa, no." "Let me finish." His hands dropped to his lap, trembling more than before. "I am dying, Olivia. The doctors give me perhaps 6 months, perhaps less. Your mother doesn't know. I've kept it from her, from all of you. But you deserve the truth." The world tilted. Olivia grabbed the arm of his chair to steady herself. "No, no, Papa, you can't." "We all can," he said gently. "Some of us just meet the end sooner than others. And before I go, I need to know that you and your mother and Margaret will be cared for. The Duke of Greystone can provide that. He can give you everything I cannot." "But not love," Olivia whispered. "Not happiness." Her father smiled, sad and tender. "My darling girl, I married your mother because our families arranged it. I was 19 and terrified, and she was 17 and furious. We had nothing in common except our duty." He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. "But duty became respect. Respect became friendship, and friendship became the deepest love I have ever known. Perhaps you and the Duke will find your own path to that destination. And if we don't, then you will have security, protection, and the freedom to choose your own form of contentment. That is more than most women of our class can claim." Olivia rested her head against her father's knee, feeling the tears finally come. He stroked her hair the way he had when she was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "I wanted to choose," she whispered. "I wanted to fall in love with someone who looked at me like I was the whole world." "I know," he murmured. "I know." They sat like that for a long time, while the fire burned low and the clock ticked away the last hours of Olivia's old life. Morning came with the scandal sheets. Greystone grabs governess. Duke claims ruined rose in shocking garden scene. Olivia threw the paper into the fire and watched it burn. She was not a governess. She was the daughter of a baron, albeit one fallen on hard times. But accuracy had never mattered to the gossip rags. What mattered was sensation, scandal, the delicious thrill of watching the mighty Duke forced into an unexpected marriage. The drawing room was flooded with calling cards before noon. Ladies who had never deigned to acknowledge the Ashfords before, suddenly desperate to pay their respects to the future Duchess of Greystone. Her mother accepted none of them. "Let them stew," Elizabeth Ashford said with uncharacteristic steel in her voice. "Let them wonder and whisper. When you are a duchess, they will grovel for your attention, and you will decide who deserves it." Olivia found she had no energy to argue. She simply sat by the window and watched the carriages pass, each one carrying curious passengers hoping for a glimpse of the scandalous bride-to-be. At precisely 3 o'clock, a ducal carriage arrived. Her heart lurched. But it wasn't the Duke who emerged. It was an elegant woman in her 50s, dressed in deep purple silk, her silver hair piled high in an elaborate coiffure. She moved with the confidence of someone born to command. And when she swept into the Ashford drawing room, the space seemed to shrink around her. "Lady Olivia," she said, her voice rich and warm despite its authority. "I am Lady Cordelia Blackwell, the Duke's aunt. My nephew has asked me to call on you to discuss arrangements for the wedding." Olivia rose and curtsied, feeling suddenly shabby in her simple day dress. "Lady Cordelia, you honor us with your visit." The older woman waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. The honor is ours." She settled into a chair as if she owned it and fixed Olivia with a penetrating gaze. "Now then, let us speak plainly, as I despise pretense. You don't want to marry my nephew." Olivia blinked, caught off guard by the directness. That is, don't dissemble, child. I can see it in your eyes. You feel trapped, forced into a union you never desired." Lady Cordelia leaned forward. "Am I wrong?" There seemed little point in lying. "No, my lady, you are not wrong." "Good. Then we understand each other." She smiled, and it transformed her austere face into something almost kind. "I won't insult you with platitudes about duty or fortune, but I will tell you something about my nephew that might ease your mind." Olivia waited, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Damien has been running from marriage for 15 years, Lady Cordelia said. Every ambitious mamma in England has thrown daughters at him, and he has deflected them all with the skill of a master swordsman. Do you know why? Because he values his freedom? Because he made a promise." Lady Cordelia's voice softened. "When he was 22, he fell desperately in love with a young woman, a merchant's daughter, entirely unsuitable by society's standards. His father forbade the match. Damien defied him and prepared to elope, but the night before they were to run away together, she disappeared." Olivia leaned forward despite herself. What happened to her? She was found 3 days later in the Thames. The official verdict was suicide, driven to despair by the impossibility of their situation. But Damien never believed it. He thought his father had— She stopped, shaking her head. "Well, it was never proven. But from that day forward, Damien swore he would never marry unless it was to save someone who needed saving, unless it was an act of protection rather than convenience." The revelation settled over Olivia like a heavy cloak. Suddenly, the Duke's actions in the Queen's ballroom made terrible sense. "He's trying to save me," she whispered. "He's trying to give you what he couldn't give her, a choice, even if it's between 2 difficult paths, ruin or rescue. Lady Cordelia reached out and took Olivia's hand. "I'm not telling you this to manipulate your feelings. I'm telling you because you deserve to understand the man you're marrying. He is not a hero from a romance novel. He is complicated and damaged and impossibly stubborn, but he is also honorable in ways that society has long forgotten." Olivia felt something shift inside her chest. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the first stirring of understanding. "What happened to his father?" she asked quietly. "He died 6 months after the girl. Some said it was a stroke. Damien said it was divine justice." Lady Cordelia released her hand and stood. "Now then, the wedding will be held at Greystone Abbey in 3 weeks. I will send my modiste to you this afternoon for your trousseau. You'll also need instruction in managing a ducal household. I've arranged for the housekeeper at Greystone to arrive next week to begin your education." Olivia's head spun. So quickly? The Queen demanded a swift wedding, and in this case, speed works in your favor. The faster this is done, the faster society will move on to the next scandal. She paused at the door, looking back. "One more thing, child. Damien has many walls, but they're not impenetrable. If you decide to try, truly try, I think you might be surprised by what you find on the other side." Then she was gone in a rustle of purple silk, leaving only the faint scent of lavender in her wake. The Duke called that afternoon. Olivia received him in the small drawing room, her mother playing chaperone from a discreet distance. He looked different in daylight, less severe perhaps, though no less commanding. His dark hair was carelessly windswept, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. "I've brought you something," he said finally, withdrawing a small velvet box from his coat. "It belonged to my mother." Inside was a ring, an intricate band of gold set with emeralds and diamonds, the stones catching the afternoon light and throwing green fire across the walls. It was the most beautiful thing Olivia had ever seen. It was also a shackle. "I can't accept this," she said automatically. "It's not a gift, it's a requirement." He took the ring from the box and reached for her hand. She let him take it, feeling the warmth of his fingers against her cold skin. "Lady Olivia Ashford, will you do me the honor of becoming my Duchess?" The formal words felt absurd given their circumstances, but she understood the necessity of the performance. Her mother was watching. The servants were undoubtedly listening at the door. This moment would be whispered about in kitchens and parlors across London. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "I will." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, impossibly perfectly, as if it had been made for her, as if fate had measured her hand years ago and crafted this beautiful trap. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then, even quieter, "I'm sorry." She looked up sharply, searching his face. The apology had been sincere. She could hear it in his voice, see it in the tight line of his mouth. "For what?" she asked. "For saving me or for condemning me?" "For not finding another way." The answer surprised her. She had expected deflection or pride. Instead, she found a glimpse of genuine regret. "Your aunt came to see me," Olivia said. "She told me about your first love." His entire body tensed. The shutters came down over his eyes, transforming him back into the cold, unreadable aristocrat. "Cordelia talks too much. She thought I should understand. And do you understand?" Olivia looked down at the ring on her finger, at the light dancing through the emeralds. "I understand that you're trying to rewrite an ending. I'm not sure yet if that's noble or selfish." He stood abruptly, moving to the window, putting distance between them. "It doesn't matter which. The result is the same." "It matters to me." He turned, and for a moment She saw past his defenses to the raw grief still living underneath. 15 years had not healed that wound. Perhaps nothing ever would. Her name was Catherine, he said. She loved gardens, particularly roses. She said they proved that beautiful things could have thorns and still be worth the pain of holding them. His laugh was bitter. I haven't been able to look at a rose garden since without seeing her face. Olivia's throat tightened. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But the way he said it, as if trying to convince himself, suggested otherwise. They stood on opposite sides of the room. Two strangers bound together by scandal and circumstance and the ghosts of the past. We should discuss practical matters, Damien said, his voice becoming brisk and businesslike. After the wedding, we'll reside primarily at Greystone Abbey. I have the London house, of course, for the season, but I prefer the country. You'll have your own apartments and complete freedom to manage your time as you see fit. I won't make demands on you beyond what's required for public appearances. How civilized, Olivia said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Separate lives under one roof. A marriage in name only. Would you prefer I pretend otherwise? Pretend that this is a love match rather than an arrangement? I would prefer honesty, which you've just given me. She stood as well, squaring her shoulders. If we're to be honest, then let me be clear. I will fulfill my duties as your Duchess. I will manage your household and attend your functions and play my role without complaint. But I will not pretend affection I don't feel. I don't expect you to, and I will not forgive you for taking my choice. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, perhaps, or understanding. That is your right. They faced each other like duelists preparing for battle, each taking the measure of their opponent. Her mother chose that moment to clear her throat delicately from her corner. "Perhaps some tea?" she suggested, her voice overly bright. The spell broke. Damien bowed. "Thank you, Lady Ashford, but I must take my leave." "I have business to attend to." He turned back to Olivia. "I'll send word about the final arrangements. If you need anything at all, send word to my steward." "I need my freedom," Olivia wanted to say. "I need my life back." Instead, she curtsied and said, "Thank you, Your Grace." He left without another word, and Olivia was alone with her mother and the weight of the emerald ring dragging her hand down like an anchor. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations that felt like preparations for an execution rather than a wedding. The modiste arrived with fabrics and fashion plates. Olivia stood for endless hours while she was pinned and measured and draped in silks and satins. The wedding gown was to be white, naturally, with Brussels lace and seed pearls, a confection worthy of a duchess, her mother said, with tears of joy in her eyes. Olivia felt like a corpse being dressed for its funeral. The Duke's housekeeper, Mrs. Havering, came to instruct her on the management of Greystone Abbey. The woman was efficient and kind, but the sheer scale of what Olivia would be responsible for was overwhelming. Greystone employed over 100 servants. It hosted visiting dignitaries and royalty. It had been standing since the 14th century, and every stone of it would be Olivia's burden to maintain. "Don't worry yourself overmuch, my lady," Mrs. Havering said, seeing the panic in Olivia's eyes. "The staff knows their duties well. They'll guide you until you find your footing." But Olivia didn't want to find her footing. She wanted to run. She saw the Duke only twice more before the wedding. Once at a formal dinner hosted by Lady Cordelia, where they sat at opposite ends of a long table and spoke to everyone except each other. And once when he came to present her father with the marriage settlements. Olivia had not been present for that meeting, but her father had called her to his study afterward. "He's been more than generous," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I could have hoped. Your dowry is restored, Margaret's future secured. And he settled a substantial sum on you personally, money that remains yours alone, not tied to the marriage. He looked up at her, his eyes shining. He's given you independence, Olivia. Whatever else happens, you'll never be trapped by poverty. The Duke had given her financial freedom, even as he took her personal freedom. She didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. The night before the wedding, her father grew worse. The tremors had spread from his hands to his entire body. He could barely stand. The doctor was called, and he emerged from the sick room with a grave face. "I'm afraid Lord Ashford should not travel," he said. "The journey to Greystone Abbey could be fatal." Olivia felt the last pillar of her old life crack and fall. She sent word to the Duke immediately. His response came within the hour. The wedding would be moved to London. He was arranging for a special license to marry at St. George's Chapel. Her father would not have to travel anywhere. It was a kindness she hadn't expected. That night, unable to sleep, Olivia sat by her father's bedside and held his shaking hand. "I wish I could walk you down the aisle," he whispered. "I wish I could give you away properly." "You're giving me everything, Papa," she said, her throat tight. "Your love, your blessing, that's all I need." "Be happy, Olivia. Promise me you'll try to be happy." "I promise," she lied. The wedding morning dawned gray and cold, with rain threatening in the heavy clouds. Olivia stood in her chamber while her mother and two maids laced her into the wedding gown. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, beautiful in the way a marble statue is beautiful, cold, lifeless, perfect. Her mother wept as she placed the veil over Olivia's face. "My darling girl, my beautiful, beautiful girl." Margaret, just 16 and still soft with youth, clutched Olivia's hand. "You'll be a duchess," she breathed. "It's like a fairy tale." "Yes," Olivia said distantly, "just like a fairy tale." The carriage ride to St. George's Chapel was short. The church was packed with London's elite, all eager to witness the scandalous wedding. Olivia recognized faces from the Queen's ball. Lady Pembroke, who had discovered them, sitting in the front pew with a sour expression. The various lords and ladies who had gasped and whispered and feasted on her humiliation. Now they were here to see the consequence. The Duke stood at the altar, flanked by his best man, a military gentleman Olivia didn't recognize. Damien was dressed in black, severe and formal, his face an unreadable mask. When Olivia began her walk down the aisle, alone as her father couldn't be there, she saw his eyes track her progress with an intensity that made her breath catch. The ceremony was brief and formal. They spoke their vows in steady voices, each word binding them tighter. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke lifted her veil with careful, impersonal hands and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips that tasted like duty. The congregation applauded. Olivia wanted to scream. Instead, she smiled. She took her new husband's arm. She walked back down that endless aisle as the Duchess of Greystone, while the rain finally began to fall outside, drumming against the stained glass windows like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. The wedding breakfast was held at the Duke's London residence, a palatial mansion in Grosvenor Square that made Olivia's family townhouse look like a gardener's cottage. She was introduced to what felt like hundreds of people, lords and ladies, politicians and military officers, distant Blackwell relatives and business associates. Everyone congratulated her. Everyone told her how lucky she was. Everyone looked at her with that mixture of envy and pity that she was beginning to recognize as the standard expression for women in arranged marriages. The Duke remained at her side throughout, playing his part flawlessly. To any observer, they must have looked like a proper couple, dignified, harmonious, content. Inside, Olivia was drowning. Finally, mercifully, Lady Cordelia appeared at her elbow. "Come, my dear, I'll show you to your apartments. You must be exhausted." Olivia seized the escape gratefully. She followed Lady Cordelia through labyrinthine corridors, past rooms filled with priceless art and ancient furniture, until they reached a suite in the East Wing. "These are your private rooms," Lady Cordelia said, opening the door to reveal a beautiful sitting room decorated in soft blues and golds. "Your bedchamber is through there. The Duke's apartments are in the West Wing. You won't be disturbed unless you wish to be." Separate apartments, separate wings, a marriage on paper only. Olivia nodded numbly. Lady Cordelia studied her for a moment, then sighed. "I know this isn't what you wanted, child, but give it time. Give him time. Damien is honoring a dead girl's memory," Olivia finished. "I know. Your nephew has made it quite clear that this marriage is a transaction, not a romance." "Has he?" Lady Cordelia's expression was unreadable. Or has he told himself that story so many times he started to believe it? Before Olivia could respond, the older woman left, leaving her alone in her gilded cage. That night, Olivia stood at the window of her new bedchamber and looked out over the manicured gardens of Grosvenor Square. Somewhere in this enormous house was her husband. She didn't know where, didn't care, she told herself. But when she finally climbed into the huge, empty bed, she couldn't help but wonder if the Duke was lying awake too, thinking about a merchant's daughter who had loved roses and had died in the cold waters of the Thames 15 years ago. And she wondered if she would spend the rest of her life competing with a ghost. They left for Greystone Abbey the next morning. The journey took 2 days, with an overnight stop at an inn. Damien had arranged separate rooms, of course he had. Olivia ate dinner alone, pretended to sleep, and tried not to think about wedding nights that weren't happening. When they finally arrived at Greystone Abbey, Olivia understood why it had remained in the Blackwell family for 6 centuries. The estate was breathtaking, a sprawling Gothic manor house set in thousands of acres of parkland, with formal gardens and wild forests and a lake that sparkled in the afternoon sun. It was also massive and intimidating and utterly foreign. The staff assembled to greet them, rows and rows of servants in perfect livery, each one curtsying or bowing as the Duke presented Olivia as their new mistress. She tried to remember names and faces, but they blurred together in a sea of unfamiliar people who now depended on her for their livelihoods. Mrs. Havering, thank God, was there to guide her through the introductions. The housekeeper had a knack for sensing when Olivia was overwhelmed and would smoothly redirect attention elsewhere. "I've prepared the Duchess's apartments in the South Wing, Mrs. Havering. I took the liberty of arranging fresh flowers. I hope you don't mind, Your Grace." "Not at all. Thank you, Mrs. Havering." The Duke, who had been standing stiffly beside her throughout the introductions, finally spoke. "I'll leave you to settle in. If you need anything, Mrs. Havering will assist you. I'll be in the study if there's any urgent matter." And just like that, he disappeared into the depths of his house, leaving Olivia with the servants and the overwhelming weight of her new responsibilities. The first week at Greystone Abbey passed in a strange, dreamlike state. Olivia spent her days learning the rhythms of the household, when meals were served, how the staff rotations worked, where everything was stored. Mrs. Havering was a patient teacher, and gradually Olivia began to feel less like a lost stranger and more like someone who might actually belong here. She saw the Duke only at dinner, which they took formally in the state dining room, a cavernous space designed to seat 50, but now holding only 2, perched at opposite ends of an absurdly long table. Their conversations were polite and impersonal. He asked about her day, she asked about his estate business. They discussed the weather, upcoming local events, the health of various horses. They never discussed anything that mattered. After dinner, he would bow and retire to his study or his own apartments. Olivia would return to hers, dismiss her maid, and spend long hours sitting at her window, looking out at the darkened gardens and wondering how this had become her life. On the 8th day, she decided to explore. She had been keeping to the main house, but the grounds were extensive, and she needed to escape the walls that were beginning to feel like a prison. She put on a simple walking dress and sturdy boots and set out into the parkland. It was a beautiful autumn day, crisp and golden. She walked for what felt like hours, discovering hidden grottos and ancient oak trees and meandering streams. Eventually, she came upon a walled garden that seemed separate from the formal grounds. The gate was locked, but it was old, and the lock yielded after some effort. Inside was a rose garden. Olivia's breath caught. It was neglected, overgrown and wild, with roses that had clearly not been tended in years. But it was still beautiful in its abandonment, with blooms in every color tangling together in a riot of thorns and petals. This was Catherine's garden. Olivia spun around to find the Duke standing in the gateway, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to trespass. I'll go." "No." He stepped into the garden, looking around with eyes that held old pain. "I've kept it locked for 15 years. Perhaps it's time it was opened again." They stood in silence among the wild roses. "She would have hated this," he said finally. "Hated seeing her garden neglected. She used to spend hours here, pruning and weeding and coaxing the stubborn ones to bloom." His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so sad. She had a talent for making difficult things thrive. Olivia felt something crack inside her chest. Not quite sympathy, but something close. "We could restore it," she heard herself say, "if you wanted, if you think she would have liked that." He looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time since the wedding. "Why would you do that?" "Because I understand what it's like to lose something precious, and because even if we can't have the marriage either of us wanted, perhaps we can give each other small kindnesses, like tending to forgotten gardens." For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, very quietly, "She would have liked you, I think, Catherine. She had a talent for seeing past facades to the real person underneath." Then she was wiser than most of society. "Yes." He moved to one of the overgrown rose bushes and carefully touched a bloom, his fingers gentle on the delicate petals. "Yes, she was." They stayed in the garden until the sun began to set, not speaking much, but somehow the silence felt less empty than before. And when they walked back to the house together, there was something different in the air between them. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps the first thawing of the ice. That night, at dinner, they sat closer together, just a few chairs apart instead of at opposite ends of the table. It was a small change, but it felt monumental. "I received word from London today," Damien said as the soup was cleared. "Your father's condition has stabilized. The doctor thinks he may have months rather than weeks." Relief flooded through Olivia so powerfully that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank God," she whispered. "Oh, thank God. I've arranged for him to stay at my London house when he's well enough to travel. The city doctors will have better access to treatments, and your mother and sister will be more comfortable there." She looked at him, stunned. "You would do that?" "Of course, they're family now." Family. The word hung between them, a word that meant obligation, but might also mean connection, care, something more than the cold transaction they had agreed to. "Thank you," Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Truly, thank you." He inclined his head. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. That night, lying in her enormous bed, Olivia found herself thinking not about her lost freedom or her forced marriage, but about a man who had locked away a rose garden for 15 years because the pain of seeing it was too much to bear, and who had opened it again today for her. The restoration of Catherine's garden became their project. Every afternoon, weather permitting, they met at the walled garden with tools and gloves. Damien taught Olivia how to prune properly, how to identify diseases, how to coax the neglected plants back to health. They worked side by side in companionable silence, their hands dirty, their faces flushed with exertion. It was, Olivia realized with some surprise, the happiest she had been since her life had been turned upside down. "You're good at this," Damien said one afternoon, watching her expertly tie back a climbing rose. Natural talent. Or good instruction. Take the compliment, Olivia. It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal lady or your grace. The intimacy of it sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Then I'll say thank you," she replied, meeting his eyes, "and offer one in return. You're a patient teacher. I had a good example. Catherine never lost her temper, even when I murdered 3 rose bushes in a single week through sheer incompetence." They had fallen into the habit of talking about Catherine while they worked. At first, Olivia had found it strange, sharing her husband with his dead first love. But gradually, she came to understand that by listening to these stories, by helping to preserve this living memorial, she was healing something broken in him. And perhaps, in the process, healing something in herself. "Tell me about her," Olivia said, settling onto the bench they had restored. "Really, tell me. Not just the garden stories." Damien sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She was the daughter of a textile merchant, self-made man, had built his business from nothing. Catherine was sharp as a tack, could calculate figures in her head faster than any clerk. She wanted to expand her father's business into France, had all these plans and strategies. He smiled, lost in memory. She was brilliant, and society couldn't see past her merchant blood to appreciate it. "Your father disapproved." "My father saw everything as a transaction. Marriage was about consolidating power, not about happiness. When I told him I wanted to marry Catherine, he said I was being foolish, sentimental, that I would regret throwing away my future for a woman who couldn't possibly understand our world." "What did you say?" "I said I didn't want to understand a world that couldn't value someone like her." His voice went soft. "And then I lost her anyway. And I've spent 15 years wondering if my father was right, if my selfishness is what killed her." Olivia turned to face him fully. "You can't truly believe that." "What else am I to believe? She drowned herself because she thought we had no future together, because I couldn't protect her from society's judgment, because I wasn't strong enough to—" "Stop." Olivia grabbed his hand, surprising them both with the contact. "You were 22. You were fighting against forces that have crushed people twice your age and experience. If anyone failed her, it was a system that values bloodlines over brilliance." He stared at their joined hands. "You're very wise for someone who hates me." "I don't hate you," Olivia said, and realized with a start that it was true. Somewhere between the wedding and this moment, her anger had transformed into something more complex. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "I resent the situation, but I don't hate you." That's something, at least. They sat there for a long moment, hands still clasped, surrounded by roses that were slowly coming back to life under their care. "I never asked you," Damien said quietly, "what you wanted. Before all this happened, what dreams did I steal from you?" The question was so unexpected, so genuinely curious, that Olivia found herself answering honestly. I wanted to travel. My mother's aunt had been to Italy and brought back such wonderful stories. I used to dream about seeing the world, experiencing different cultures, learning languages. She smiled sadly. It sounds foolish now. It sounds wonderful. Wonderful and impossible. Women don't travel alone, and my family could never have afforded to send me with a proper companion. But a duchess could travel, Damien said slowly, with her husband, to estates on the continent. Business requires trips abroad, after all. Olivia's heart skipped. You would do that? Why not? I have holdings in France, connections in Italy. And perhaps it's time I stopped hiding in my grief and remembered how to live. He looked at her, something new in his eyes. Not love, not yet, but possibility. We could go in the spring, after your father. He trailed off delicately. After her father died, the unspoken words hung heavy between them. I would like that, Olivia said softly. Very much. They stayed in the garden until the sun set, planning impossible journeys and restoring impossible roses, and somewhere in that golden light, the wall between them began to crack. But cracks, once formed, can widen in unexpected ways. A month after their arrival at Greystone, a visitor came to the Abbey. Olivia was in the library when Mrs. Havering found her. Your Grace, there's a gentleman here to see His Grace. He's quite insistent. Something in the housekeeper's tone set off alarm bells. Who is he? A Mr. Jonathan Reeves, ma'am. He says it's a matter of utmost urgency. Olivia had never heard the name before. Does the Duke know he's here? His Grace is in the north pastures inspecting the sheep. He won't be back for at least an hour. Curiosity warred with propriety. Propriety lost. I'll receive him, Olivia decided. She found Mr. Reeves in the drawing room, a thin man in his 50s with nervous hands and a threadbare coat that suggested fallen fortunes. He bowed awkwardly when she entered. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. I had hoped to speak with the Duke. I'm afraid my husband is out on the estate. Perhaps I can help you? Reeves hesitated, his hands twisting his hat. It's a delicate matter, ma'am. Then let us speak plainly and quickly. What brings you to Greystone? He drew a deep breath. I was steward to the late Duke, His Grace's father. Everything inside Olivia went still. I see. I left service after his death, took my pension and retired quietly. But my conscience, he stopped, struggling with himself. My conscience won't let me die without speaking the truth, not after what I witnessed. What truth? Olivia asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Catherine Moore, the young woman who died. They said it was suicide, but it weren't. Reeves' voice shook. I saw what happened. I saw the men the old Duke hired. I saw them drag her from the garden house where she was waiting for young Lord Blackwell. I heard her screaming. The world tilted. Are you saying? I'm saying she was murdered, Your Grace, on the old Duke's orders, and I kept silent because I was a coward, because he paid me to keep silent. Reeves pulled a packet of letters from his coat with shaking hands. I've kept these all these years. Letters from the old Duke to the men he hired. Instructions, payments, everything. His Grace would need to finally know the truth about what his father did. Olivia took the letters with numb fingers. They felt like poison. Why now? She whispered. Why come forward after 15 years? Because I'm dying, ma'am. The cancer. The doctors give me weeks, and I can't meet my Maker with this sin on my soul. Tears ran down his weathered face. And because the Duke deserves to know, deserves to stop blaming himself for something that weren't his fault. Hell destroy you for keeping silent this long, Olivia said. Not a threat, a warning. I know. I welcome it. Better his justice than God's. She looked down at the letters in her hands, at the truth that would shatter what fragile peace Damien had built, the truth that would vindicate him, but reopen every wound. Wait here, she told Reeves. She found Damien an hour later in the stables, brushing down his horse after the ride. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting with a smile that had become more frequent in recent weeks. The smile died when he saw her expression. What's wrong? There's someone here to see you, someone with information about Catherine. He watched him go utterly still, every muscle in his body tensing like a bowstring. What kind of information? The kind that changes everything. She handed him the letters. Damien read them in the study with Olivia and Reeves present. His face was expressionless throughout, but his hands shook, the only sign of the earthquake happening inside him. When he finished, he looked up at Reeves with eyes like winter. You knew. All this time, you knew my father had her killed, and you said nothing. Yes, Your Grace. Reeves didn't flinch from the accusation. I've lived with that shame every day since. She was 19 years old. She was innocent. And you let everyone think she killed herself out of despair. Damien's voice was deadly calm. You let me think I had driven her to it. I know. God forgive me, I know. God may forgive you. Damien stood, towering over the older man. I won't. Get out of my house, now. Reeves bowed and fled. When they were alone, Damien stood at the window, his back to Olivia, his shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining control. Damien, she said softly. He murdered her. The words came out choked. My own father. Because she wasn't good enough for his precious bloodline. Because she had the audacity to make me happy. And I've spent 15 years believing it was my fault, that I had failed her. You didn't fail her. You were betrayed by someone who should have protected you both. He whirled on her, and the raw anguish in his face made her breath catch. I spent 15 years mourning her, 15 years building my life around her memory. And all of it was based on a lie. She didn't choose to leave me. She was stolen from me. And I can never, his voice broke, I can never get justice for her. My father is dead. The men he hired are probably dead. There's no one left to punish. Olivia moved to him without thinking, placing her hands on his chest, feeling his heart racing under her palms. Then honor her instead. Honor the truth of what she was. Brilliant, brave, worthy of love. Don't let his cruelty define her memory. How? The question was a plea. How do I honor someone who was destroyed because of me? By living, Olivia said fiercely. By refusing to let his hatred win. By being happy despite everything he did to prevent it. He stared at her, and something shifted in his expression, something that made her pulse quicken. You're extraordinary, he said, his voice rough. Do you know that? You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met, and I've been so blind. Damien, I married you to save you, but you've been saving me. Every day, every moment. You've been patient with my ghosts and kind to my grief, and you've asked for nothing in return. That's not true. I asked for honesty, and you've given it. No, I haven't. He reached up, cupping her face in his hands. I haven't told you that these past weeks in the garden have been the first time I felt alive in 15 years. I haven't told you that I find myself thinking about you constantly. Your laugh, your sharp wit, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I haven't told you that I'm falling in love with you, and I have no right to ask if you might ever feel the same. She kissed him. It was impulsive and reckless, and nothing like the chaste pack at their wedding. This was fire and need and the releasing of weeks of pent-up tension. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair, kissing her like she was air and he was drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Olivia," he whispered. "God, Olivia." "I don't know if I love you," she said honestly, "but I know I'm beginning to. I know that somewhere between resenting you and understanding you, I've started to care. I know that the thought of you in pain makes my chest ache. And I know that I want to try, want to see if we can build something real from this strange beginning." He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me regardless." He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected and wonderful that Olivia found herself smiling despite everything. "Come with me," he said suddenly, taking her hand. "Where?" "You'll see." He led her through the house and out into the twilight. They walked hand in hand to the walled garden, Catherine's garden, which they had restored together. Under the rising moon, the roses glowed silver and blue. Damien pulled her close, and they swayed there among the flowers, dancing without music. "What are we doing?" Olivia asked, though she didn't stop moving. "I'm dancing with my wife, the way I should have done at our wedding, the way I should have done a dozen times since then. We didn't have music at our wedding. We don't need music now. I can hear it in my head. Can you?" And strangely, impossibly, she could hear the phantom orchestra playing something slow and sweet, could feel the rhythm in the way their bodies moved together. "Thank you," he said after a long moment, "for reading those letters with me, for not letting me face that truth alone." "We're married," Olivia said simply. "That means facing truths together, good and bad. Is this the good or the bad?" She looked up at him, at the face that had seemed so cold and unreachable just weeks ago, and saw nothing but warmth and hope and cautious joy. "This," she said, "is the good." The next morning, Olivia woke to find a note slipped under her door. "The blue drawing room. 1 hour. Please come. D." Curious, she dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. The blue drawing room had been transformed. Every surface was covered with maps of Italy, France, Greece, Spain. Pin markers indicated cities and routes. Notes were scattered everywhere, in Damien's precise handwriting. He stood in the center of it all, looking simultaneously proud and nervous. "What is this?" Olivia breathed. "Our trip. I stayed up all night planning it. We'll leave in April, after the estate accounts are settled. 6 months on the continent. Venice, Rome, Paris, Vienna, anywhere you want to go." He caught her hands. "I want to see the world through your eyes, Olivia. I want to watch you discover all the things you've dreamed about. I want to give you the adventure you thought you'd lost." She couldn't speak, could only stare at him with tears blurring her vision. "Is that yes?" he asked anxiously. Instead of answering, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the joy and gratitude and blooming affection she couldn't put into words. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning, a real, unguarded grin that transformed his face into something boyish and beautiful. "I'll take that as a yes." But happiness, Olivia was learning, was always fragile. A week later, word came from London. Her father had taken a turn for the worse. The doctor said it was a matter of days now, perhaps hours. Damien arranged everything immediately. They took the fastest coach, changing horses at every post. They made the 2-day journey in 30 hours, Olivia barely sleeping, her husband's arm around her shoulders the whole way. They arrived at the London house to find her mother and Margaret already there, both red-eyed with weeping. The doctor met them in the hallway, his face grave. "He's been asking for you, Your Grace. He's holding on, but I don't think it will be much longer. Olivia nodded, unable to speak, and climbed the stairs to her father's room. He looked so small in the enormous bed. His skin was gray, his breathing labored. But when he saw her, his eyes lit up with the old warmth. "My darling girl," he whispered, "you came." She took his shaking hand and held it gently. "Of course I came, Papa." "Are you happy?" The question was so earnest, so full of paternal concern even now at the end, that tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes, Papa." "I'm happy. He's a good man. You were right. We're finding our way to each other." Relief washed over his face. "Thank God. Thank God. I can go in peace, knowing you're cared for." "Don't talk about going," Olivia choked out. "Please." "Hush, child. We all go. But I go content, knowing I saw you become a duchess, knowing you'll be safe." He squeezed your hand with what little strength remained. "Tell Margaret to be brave. Tell your mother I love her. And Olivia, tell that husband of yours that if he fails to make you happy, I'll haunt him from the grave." She laughed through her tears. "I'll tell him." "Good." His eyes were drifting closed. "Good girl. My good, brave girl." "Papa." But he was already slipping away, his breath slowing, his grip loosening. She held his hand until the end, which came quietly, just after midnight. One moment he was there, diminished but present, and the next he was simply gone, leaving only an empty shell behind. Olivia sat by his bedside for a long time, unable to move, unable to process that he was truly gone. It was Damien who finally came and gently lifted her from the chair, holding her while she sobbed into his chest. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you." And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. The funeral was held at the family church in the country, a small affair with only close friends and family. Olivia stood between her mother and sister, feeling Damien's solid presence behind her, his hand occasionally touching her back in silent support. She didn't cry during the service. She had no tears left. Afterward, at the wake, people came to offer condolences. They called her Your Grace now, treated her with deference that felt alien and wrong. She wanted to scream at them that she was still just Olivia, still the girl whose father had just died, still lost and grieving and not at all Duchess-like. But she smiled and thanked them and played her part, because that's what her father had taught her to do. It was Lady Cordelia who saved her, appearing at her elbow with a glass of sherry and a knowing look. "Come, child, you need air." They walked in the churchyard among the ancient stones. "You're holding up remarkably well," Lady Cordelia observed. "I'm falling apart. I'm just doing it quietly." "That's what makes it remarkable." The older woman squeezed her hand. "Your father would be proud of you, Olivia. You've become a true duchess, not because of your title, but because of your strength." "I don't feel strong. I feel broken." "Strength isn't the absence of brokenness. It's continuing on despite it." Lady Cordelia paused by a weathered tombstone. "Do you know what I admire most about you? You could have stayed angry at Damien, could have made both your lives miserable out of spite. Instead, you chose to build something new. That takes more courage than most people will ever understand." Olivia looked back toward the church, where she could see Damien through the window, talking quietly with Margaret, making her laugh despite the circumstances. Her husband, her strange, complicated, grieving husband, who was trying so hard to be what she needed. "I think I love him," she said quietly. "I didn't want to, didn't think I could, but I think I do." Lady Cordelia smiled. "Then tell him, dear. Life is too short and too uncertain to leave important things unsaid." That night, back at the London house, Olivia stood at the door connecting her rooms to Damien's. She had never used this door before. had never crossed the threshold that separated their separate lives. She knocked. "Come in," his voice called. He was at his desk, still in his funeral blacks, going through correspondence. When he saw her, he stood immediately. "Olivia, is everything all right? Do you need anything?" "You," she said simply. "I need you." He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. "I'm here, always." "I love you," the words came out in a rush. I don't know when it happened or how, but somewhere between the rose garden and the maps and you holding me while I cried, I fell in love with you, and I needed you to know. Because my father was right, life is too short to waste time pretending otherwise. For a moment, Damien simply stared at her, his expression stunned. Then he was kissing her, deep and desperate and full of all the emotion he kept locked away from the rest of the world. "I love you," he said between kisses. "God, Olivia, I love you so much, it terrifies me. I love your strength and your kindness and your sharp tongue. I love the way you laugh and the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. I love that you saw me at my worst and chose to stay. I love—" She kissed him again, cutting off the flood of words. "Show me," she whispered. "Don't tell me. Show me." He did. Spring came to Greystone Abbey with a riot of color. The rose garden, fully restored, burst into bloom. Hundreds of flowers in every shade from white to deep crimson. Olivia walked through it each morning, sometimes alone, sometimes with Damien, and felt Catherine's presence not as a weight, but as a blessing. A reminder that love, once given, never truly dies. It just transforms into something new. Margaret came to visit, bubbling with excitement about her first season. "You must come to London for my debut," she insisted. "I need my Duchess sister there to lend me consequence." "We'll be traveling," Olivia reminded her gently, "but we'll return in time for the end of the season. I promise." The trip to the continent was everything she had dreamed and more. Venice's canals at sunset, Rome's ancient ruins, Paris's grand boulevards, Vienna's elegant coffeehouses, and everywhere, Damien at her side, his hand in hers, his love a constant presence that made every sight more beautiful. In Venice, they stood on the Bridge of Sighs at midnight, and he kissed her under the stars. In Rome, they threw coins in the Trevi Fountain together, making wishes they didn't speak aloud. In Paris, they danced at a glittering ball, and she realized that this was the fairy tale Margaret had seen on her wedding day. Not the dress or the title, but the look in her husband's eyes, the love they had built from duty and scandal and grief. When they returned to England, it was to news that Lady Pembroke, the woman who had discovered them in the garden, had been caught in a far more scandalous situation of her own. Society had moved on, as it always did, to the next source of gossip. Their story was old news now, boring, settled, perfect. 1 year after their wedding, they stood together in Catherine's garden on their anniversary. Damien had placed a simple stone marker among the roses, inscribed with her name and the dates of her birth and death. "I thought it was time," he said quietly. "Time to honor her properly, not as a tragedy, but as someone who lived and loved and deserved to be remembered." Olivia took his hand. "She would approve, I think." "I know she would. And I know she'd approve of you, of us." He turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands. "Thank you for giving me permission to love again, for showing me that honoring the past doesn't mean abandoning the future." "Thank you for saving me," Olivia said, "even when I didn't want to be saved." "We saved each other," he corrected. "That's what love does. It saves us from ourselves." They stood there among the roses as the sun set over Greystone Abbey. A duke who had learned to live again, and a duchess who had found freedom in unexpected places. 2 people who had been forced together by scandal, who had built something beautiful from duty and grief, who had learned that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the worst circumstances. and who would spend the rest of their lives proving that happy endings can be found even in the most impossible situations. Epilogue. 3 years later, a daughter was born at Greystone Abbey, a dark-haired, gray-eyed little girl with her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's quiet strength. They named her Catherine, after a woman who had loved roses and had deserved better from the world. And when she was old enough, they would tell her the story of how her parents met. Not the sanitized version society preferred, but the truth. About scandal and duty and complicated beginnings. About gardens restored and hearts healed. About love that grew in unexpected soil and bloomed more beautifully because of it. But for now, Olivia held her daughter in the rose garden while Damien wrapped his arms around them both, and thought that perhaps fairy tales weren't about perfect beginnings after all. They were about imperfect people choosing each other again and again, until choosing became as natural as breathing, and that was magic enough.